Well, the last 16 months have been hard for our church family. COVID-19 and all of the butterfly effects that have come from it. Some of you have dear family members who got the exact same virus, and everything else being equal, they were in relative health, and they didn't do well with it. Some have had a long, hard recovery, and some didn't recover at all. But not just the effects of the virus itself, but again, the effects from it on our culture. The isolation that has come. Adding heat to it all has been the volatile state of our nation, whether it be related to politics and politicians and elections, or specific legislation, or miscarriages of justice that we've heard about or seen on the news, both in instances where it's just merely been asserted and also where it's actually been true. And then spilling over from that are protests, some of which turns into rioting and hostile environments. And this has produced stress levels and raised them in our country in levels that haven't been known for decades. On top of these things is the added weight and stress from strained relationships and fractured homes and families through destructive habits and behavior, sometimes through children, sometimes through parents or spouses. Instances of adultery or abandonment, substance abuse, divorce. Some children deserting and cutting off communication from their parents. Some parents abandoning and cutting off communication from their children or grandchildren. For others, though there's been no outward, obvious sign of struggle, there's still been struggle. We as a church family have been hit hard by death. Just in the last 11 months, we've averaged over one death per month. It would be an understatement to say that in many ways, we as a church family are reeling from what has seemed like a relentless season of stress and anxiety and bad news and loss and grief. So the answer that the Bible gives to the question of what do we do? What do we do when we just feel like our soul cannot take one more bit of bad news or hardship, or my mind can't take one more thing that's going to cause it spinning off into a different direction of what ifs or whys? The answer the Bible gives us is lament. It's been said that to hurt and cry is human, but to hurt and lament is Christian. To lament is to turn to God in the midst of suffering and grief, to honestly acknowledge and express how we feel, and then to move toward God in trust and praise by reminding ourselves of His goodness. This lament, this psalm, gives us permission to honestly acknowledge and express our pain. Feeling inconsolable, my soul refuses to be comforted. This moaning, when I remember God, I moan. When I meditate, my spirit faints. And that's not cross-legged transcendental meditation. That's when I try to direct my heart to the things of the Lord. All it does is feel more anguishing. This fainting spirit, verse 4, I close my eyes, or I can't close my eyes. I can't sleep. Sleep eludes me. I can't speak. my heart hurts so bad I can't even form words to talk about it. In verses 5 through 6, I try to direct my thoughts to when things were stable, when things were comfortable, when things were at peace, and all it does is cause more anguish and turmoil within me because I realize it's not that way now. This psalm, this lament, gives us permission to say these things, not to pretend like they don't exist, like they're not there. We can acknowledge reality. We can embrace the fact that it's not okay. That we don't have to put on a brave face and act like we can take it. It's not super spiritual to hide our pain. Jesus lamented. The perfect man. Jesus weeps and laments over Jerusalem, over the lostness in front of him. On the cross, he quotes Psalm 22, another lamenting song. My God, why have you forsaken me? Starting in verse 7. Will the Lord spurn forever? Will he never again be favorable? Verse 8, has his steadfast love forever ceased? Is he just going to stop loving me? His steadfast love means that it doesn't stop, but it sure feels like it stopped right now. Are his promises at an end for all time? The promises that he made and guaranteed, is that just off the table now? Because this grief feels like it's off the table. This smothering pain that feels like just emotionally and spiritually, I can't breathe. Has God forgotten to be gracious? Is it something I've done? All these questions are modeled for us in this lament. Or expressing how we feel abandoned. The Lord invites us to turn toward him with these things. The Lord can handle your questions. But brothers and sisters, to feel like God is distant, to feel like God has abandoned you in times of deep hurt and pain is a natural response that's spelled out for us right here in God's perfect and holy word. To voice those feelings sincerely is not sinful. But here we have to remember, our feelings do not always tell us the truth. And so we have a choice at this point when we verbalize, when we come to the Lord as we should, with our hurt and our pain and our questions and our doubts and our frustrations. When we express these things, we have a choice. When we have voiced our hurt, pain, grief, and our questions, will we let our feelings dictate to us what is true about God? Or will we let the truth of who God is and his perfect track record of faithfulness, will we let that truth dictate how we respond to our feelings? It's direct your grief, direct your doubts, direct your frustrations, direct your sorrow to the truth of who God is, and let the truth of who he is and all that he has done in the past and how he's always delivered on his promises and how you've seen him work in your own life to this point and the promises that he's made and are certain. Let those things stir up in you the trust and the praise. Verse 10 is the turning point. Then I said, so there's a moment when we say, I will appeal to this, to the years of the right hand of the Most High. In other words, I will appeal to the fact that God has a perfect track record of faithfulness and perfect love, perfect compassion. I will appeal to the power of the Most High to be with me in the midst of this sorrow. I will remember the deeds of the Lord, that nothing is impossible for God. Yes, I will remember your wonders of old. We need to remind ourselves with specific truths from God's word, because God's word has specific promises about who he is, about his character, that he is not like a man, he does not lie, that he does not change. And so where God has said, I am the Lord your God, abounding in steadfast love and goodness, that is still true. When he says, there is nothing impossible for me, that is still true. That means in this situation that I find myself in, when I feel like I'll never feel normal again, I'll never feel whole again after this loss or after this devastation, that's not true, because God, in the midst of our pain, in the midst of our grief, though it is real and valid, he is bigger than that pain and that grief, and he's not bound by it. His focus has turned to the character and person of God, and that has reminded his soul, it has buttressed his soul, that no matter how painful this is, no matter how deep the sorrow is, it will not consume me, and it will not push back the mighty hand of God from acting in my life. And so as we direct our hearts toward God in the midst of suffering, our own pain, our own grief, our own sorrow, with all of our doubts and our questions, we have something even greater than Asaph had. Asaph's soul was comforted and buttressed because of the revelation of God that he had at his time. But we have a much fuller revelation of God in our time. We don't just have to remember back to the Red Sea or the wilderness. We can remember the cross and the empty tomb, that God made a promise that, yes, I know that you're broken, but I will send the one who can heal your brokenness. Yes, I know that you're suffering, but I'll send the man of sorrows who is acquainted with grief to walk with you in your suffering and to make possible and to claim for you deliverance from that suffering. We don't just have hope of a memory of being delivered from bondage to another nation. We have the hope and promise of being delivered from sin and death. And we have the hope and the promise not just of the first coming of Jesus, but of the second coming of Jesus as well. That this sorrow will not last forever. That this pain, this suffering, this holding our breath for what's coming next won't last forever. That there's coming a sure and certain day when all sickness and all death and all sorrow, all broken relationships and broken families and all strained relationships and sickness and disease and automobile accidents and house fires and tsunamis and earthquakes and cancer, it'll all be gone. We're not just hoping that that's true. It is promised by the God who has never failed to keep his promise. There is a day coming when for all of God's people, all will be made well. So yes, in your sorrow, in your grief, in your hurt, in your pain, take it to the Lord. Express your questions, express your pain, express your suffering, express your hurt. He can take it. But as you come to him, don't just come and dump it all out and then leave. Come to him and then stay and linger. Remind yourself of what is true about him. Yes, this pain is real, it's authentic, and it's painful, but the truth of his promises to make it all right is even truer, even deeper, even more real than any pain or sorrow that we can feel.